Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining me for a new episode of the Women's Eye podcast. I'm your guest host, Laura Munson. The Women's Eye has been a wonderful support of my work, from my memoir, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, to my novel, Willis Grove, to my acclaimed Haven writing retreats here in Montana, where I've lived for 30 years. I love that they included me in their wonderful anthology, 20 Women Storytellers. And I'm thrilled that they've asked me to be a guest host on their wonderful All Things Women podcast. I love their mission, how they celebrate fascinating women, and you're going to meet one fascinating woman in just a minute, who are taking charge, making a difference, and helping them create the life they really want. So my guest today is Tanmeet Sethi. I'm sure I've just said that incorrectly, but we'll make sure, we'll check in a minute, is doing that and a whole lot more. Here is Tanmeet's bio. Tanmeet is a board certified integrative family medicine physician and clinical associate professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine. She has spent the past 25 years working on the front lines of the most marginalized communities, as well as globally, with victims of school shootings, surviving hurricanes, citizens impacted by police violence, and psychologists in Ukraine under attack. Tanmeet has created entire integrative medicine programs from the ground up, including the first ever fellowship in Washington State. Her expertise is widely recognized in both local and national work, which includes leading programs on healing from trauma, thought-provoking presentations to both medical and non-medical organizations, and multiple articles and textbook chapters on integrative medicine. So I want to welcome her, and then I'm going to read her summary. Hi, welcome to you, beautiful woman doing such important work in the world. Thanks for being on the Women's Eye podcast.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
I know, me too. We met each other a few weeks ago through our mutual friend, Lee Woodruff, who's also the Women's Eye, and became swift and immediate friends, probably, longtime friends. That's how I think we both feel about this. So I was really happy to be able to finally look you in the eye, not in person, but pretty close. So tell us how we say your name.
Tanmeet Sethi.
Tanmeet. So I just pronounced the T. Tanmeet.
Yeah, you're getting there.
Sethi.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try. Here we go. Tanmeet Sethi. Book summary. Now, here's the book. Joy is my justice. I spent all day yesterday reading it, coming back from a book event for a Haven alum, actually in San Francisco, and then all this morning with it. And it's just, I just marked it up all over the place. Tanmeet Sethi, MD's Joy is My Justice, published by Hachette. This month is a radical call to a wellness world full of contrived platitudes. We're going to talk about those. To expand the conversation on well-being, joy is not a destination, nor a way to think ourselves out of oppression, trauma, or unchangeable suffering. It is a deeply embodied experience, accessible to us all, and possibly the deepest justice we can know, that of ease and liberation in our bodies. Doesn't that sound good? For everyone pushed to the margins of the conversation on feeling better, for everyone who ever thought they were not resilient enough, this book is a revolutionary guide to explore and access joy told through inspiring story. And as a writing teacher, that's part of what I loved most about this book. Powerful inquiry and accessible neuroscience, all framed in the lens of equity and justice. Tanmeet is not only a physician who has worked on the front lines for the last 25 years and an expert in working with trauma globally. She is a mother whose second child has an ALS-like disease, degenerative and 100% fatal. She walks the walk, and she does it with tenderness, grace, and expertise. Welcome. Welcome, my friend. I'm so glad you're here and that you've written this book. Can't wait to give this to everyone I know. And, I interview a lot of people like this one. I mean, honestly, I committed like book violence. Like it's just, I know.
I love that.
But you love,
the only kind of violence I love.
Yes, I know. And I, as a book lover, I don't I try not to do this, but I just, I forgot that I was reading it for the interview. I just was reading it for me. So I know you've got a book event tonight, so we're going to get right into it. So I want to get into your intro, because there's a very strong call to action. And I think that's such an important thing to set up at the beginning of a book. And so at the beginning, not even page 1, this is XXV. She writes, "This is about you taking justice into your own hands, into your own body. This is about finding your path to joy, not through platitudes or contrived positivity, but instead through settling more peacefully into your skin. That is revolutionary justice, finding your own sense of safety when the world has denied it to you. And if we want more justice in the world at large, we all need to feel more of this liberation in our body first. So let's reclaim some important language." So let's talk about language first. I want to talk about the definition of joy. You introduced new ways of looking at two concepts, joy and justice, that seem so hard to attain for so many. So I want to start with joy. Why not? I love what you say about joy being something that your body knows and has always known, that it's not intellectual. So in defining joy, you also compare it with happiness. So talk to us about what is the difference for you between joy and happiness.
Yeah, this is such a big one. And I would first say that I don't actually define joy, but describe it, because I really am clear about the fact that I can't define joy for anyone else, but I can describe how to find it within yourself. Joy and happiness are so different, and the confusion between the two and the interchangeability in our language, I think, is doing some harm. And that's what I'm hoping to change a conversation around, because happiness is a cognitive construct. It's binary. It's an evaluation that we make in our mind attached to an outcome. It's beautiful. It's so nice to have, but it isn't expansive enough if the construct of your life is not happy. If right now you're suffering a grave loss or a grave challenge, if you've been living in poverty or oppression or continual trauma in your life, there are not happy things to look at. Yet joy draws on that same deep well as pain and as our capacity for love and meaning. It sits there as a container and allows us to touch moments of love, power, connection, and belonging, and yet acknowledge the truths of our life, which may be less than we hope for in any one moment.
Beautiful. I also love, as a Salinger fan, I love the Salinger quote that you use. Can you repeat it? I'll try, but I bet it's closer to you than it is to me. If you
Yeah,
can
he
recite it.
says that the biggest difference between happiness and joy is that happiness is a solid and joy is a liquid. And I think that is so powerful, because happiness is solid, it's fixed, it's either here or there, not or yes. And joy is a liquid, it flows in and out. We touch it, it may flow away, and then we touch it again. We come in and out to it. And I even describe, before I knew that quote, I described my inner joy as a river of joy. I think when we can swim in that river, we know we're there.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love it. This book is going to help so many people. Talk to us about your definition of justice, especially within the context of your book, and how do we see joy through the lens of justice? This was a new idea for me, and yet once I started reading, it wasn't new at all. It's as old as the hills, but it was just a new way of framing it. And sometimes that's what we need to finally have those light bulbs go off. So let's talk about justice through the lens of joy.
Yeah. So I always, I've been an activist my whole life and fighting on the streets and in exam rooms and with insurance companies and for policy change. And yet, this, when I learned my diagnosis, as you refer to, for my son, which is incurable, unchangeable, I thought, where am I going to fight now? How am I going to fight? And I realized that the fight was not for an external cure. The fight was for ease and safety in my body, in my son's body, for us to feel joy despite what we had been given. And once I entered into that path and really took on this concept for myself of how am I going to find joy, and realized it was there under the muck all the time, I realized that my justice was discovered. And what I would say to people is that whether it's a system of oppression or a big suffering or loss, the way that these systems and suffering thrive is that you don't thrive and then they get more powerful.
Mm.
And joy allows us to find our justice because we connect to our power and then we are rising up in the face of this suffering.
I love how you talk about ease and rising up at the same time. I
Mm.
often teach that, what does it mean to find your voice? It's when we're in this flow, like this meditative waking trance, when we lose track of time, when there's ease, even and especially when the topic is not easy, this inherently, which brings me to my next question. So you use a lot of story in this beautiful book, a lot of
Mm.
personal story. And I think this is what people ultimately take away instead of, and we'll get into the more prescriptive stuff about tips and tricks and steps and all that we both object to in lots of ways. But we'll have a moment to talk about that. But while it's a self-help book, it's also a book that's full of your personal life, and seeing so many people shy away from that vulnerability. But in my opinion, it's what we learn from others. It's when we learn from others the most. It's exactly when they're willing to share their truth in story, because that's how we live our lives, right? And scene by scene by scene, that becomes our ultimate story in the end. So what was that like for you, telling your stories and bringing us into those scenes? I mean, I'm sure it was painful, but was it healing at all? I want to know about that.
I mean, healing to the point where, Laura, what I've been saying to everyone, yesterday was my 3-week book birthday, and I've been telling everyone asks, how is it? And I say, if I could take these last few weeks and put them in a capsule to swallow anytime I needed healing medicine, I would do that, because it is not just the feedback from people that it's so inspiring and helpful and impacting their lives. That is ultimately what I was hoping for. What I did not realize is how healing it would be for me to step into my boldest truth, to really allow my story to be medicine for others. And I do that in my life day to day, but to do it on this grander scale was quite a leap of vulnerability, right? And to put my heart out into people's hands and hope that they received it lovingly. And not, I don't mean a good review. I mean, just tenderly accepting it. And I feel like this has been the most healing medicine I could have asked for in my entire path to joy.
Well, as a writing teacher, I really love hearing that.
I bet.
Would you be willing to share briefly? We have about 15 more minutes. Just a snippet of one of the stories that might have felt most healing for you to recount, and in so doing, even relive?
Yeah. Do you want me to describe it or read a
Yeah.
little?
Well, you could read it if you want. I'm going to have you read some things in a little bit, but maybe just
Okay.
describe it. How
Yeah.
about describe it?
I think one big story is the story of which you've probably read about my Masi, which means my mom's sister, coming to me in an imagery to give me some teaching and advice, you might call it, around how to live this life with my son Zubin at a time of real desperate loss of me feeling like I would not be able to mother. I do not know how to do this. How will I find it? And I was deep in a meditation, and we were supposed to find a wise guide, and I found her. And this is not something you'll see in the book is that comes easy for me. I make fun of myself because it's true. Everybody finds all these owls and tigers and people, and I find nothing. And this one day I found my Masi, and she gave me the most life-changing moment of saying, let Zubin teach you. And it changed everything for me because it really was a bigger message of your life is your teacher. You're looking for some external wisdom from someone or something or some text or some mystical tradition, but your life is right in front of you, and that's all you need.
Yeah, I love that part. I've got that one. That page is very marked up in my copy, which I'm not loaning out to anybody, by the way. Thanks for sharing that. And you're such a seeker, I just feel that seeking in you. So, to that end, so many of us are seekers, and so many of us seek through this world of, wellness, which, I'm glad our society is trying to embrace this idea of self-care and wellness.
Yes.
But that said, you and I both agree, especially as a doctor, and what what I do is to help people not heal through writing, because sometimes it makes people feel worse, but to find new awareness through creative self-expression using the written word. I do think, and you and I haven't really spoken about this a lot, but I read it in your book, that while those bullet pointed lists and tips and tricks and 10 easy steps that we find so prevalent in the wellness world might serve as a new awareness for somebody, or a temporary reprieve from the pain and stresses of their lives. What I've found, and I think you have too, is that ultimately people end up right back in the vortex of their pain. So I was so refreshed to read your stance on the wellness world, especially about the notion of resilience. So and this is a little bit, you mentioned this a bit in the bio, but I want to go deeper now. Talk to us about why you reject the wellness world's definition of resilience and what real resilience requires.
Yeah. Yeah, I say in the book, right, that resilience is what the world asks of you, but your justice is in how you answer it. And I feel like resilience is imposed on us as an expectation, as something we need to do to be resilient, to be better at being in the pain and the suffering. And all that does is create a brokenness feeling for us. That's why we get back in the spiral of pain, is that when we cannot, quote unquote, feel better or be good enough at getting better, then we feel really broken. And shame is one of our greatest crutches in our pain to layer on top. And so I think this conversation in the wellness world is only doing more harm. Instead of saying, what is your resilience? What is your way to answer this? What is your way to make a story that glorifies and triumphs your survivorship? What is not my idea of resilience? What is yours? Because frankly, I've seen enough thousands of patients in my career to tell you that getting up again tomorrow is resilience. But none of my patients understand that because it's not talked about as a triumph.
Wise, wise woman. So we'll just keep moving through here. There's so much wisdom that lives in you. Thank you.
Mm.
Well, so much of this book seems to be inspired by, and I think is inspired on top of the work that you do, by the extreme and crushing plot twist in your life, your son Zubin's diagnosis. As you write, degenerative and 100% fatal. So I want you to talk to us about how we speak to people who are living with this sort of reality, especially as a mother. As a writer, I am full of empathy, and I teach radical empathy at my writing retreats. And writers can't write effectively without a high level of empathy. In fact, that's often what, moves us into the tortured artist paradigm, which I'm trying to eradicate. But for those, but so many people are terrified of other people's pain, and they act strangely and even offensively about it, which you write about in your book. Not necessarily meaning to, they just, like, we haven't been taught what to say when somebody's going through pain, deep pain, loss, all of it. So in your book, you talk about Zubin's illness and saying things like, when people say things to you like, oh, I can't imagine, which to me is immediately distancing, immediately like, oh, that's your problem, I don't want to have to deal with it. That doesn't really feel good to hear. Oh, I can't imagine. And then I love that you share what your thoughts are in response, and she's not afraid of expletives. I don't know how the Women's Eye feels about it. So something to the tune of, great, like in her mind, like outwardly she's probably smiling, but inwardly she's thinking something more like, lucky for you, you don't have to imagine it. Go on ahead with your perfect life while I live in this one that I'm stuck with. So I love throughout the book, there are these take a pause sections, and these are teaching kind of like pop out boxes, but they're not full of tips and tricks and 10 easy steps and all that. And I'd love you to read the take a pause from this section where you talk about what people say to you when they say, I can't imagine. It's on page 24.
Yeah.
Because it's so important, and because people just don't know what to say to somebody when they're in pain often. And because if I would make a plea, do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, I
Okay,
have it.
let's hear you speak it.
I would make a plea to those who use the I cannot imagine phrase. I encourage you instead to always imagine what it could be like to feel another's pain, not because you can know without walking their path, but because not trying to imagine in my humble opinion, is a direct avoidance of empathy and connection that will separate you from them even more. Yes, their pain is so devastating that you don't even want to conceive of it. And saying you can imagine anyone's exact pain is false and trite. Yet being willing to step into this pain with them is a gift to both of you. It is the exact bridge you need to then be able to truly sit with your own pain when it comes your way. I can't know what you are going through, but I want you to know I am ready to sit here and be with you in it. Build bridges of imagination every chance you get.
I mean, you know this. That is such illumination.
Hmm.
And thank you for teaching. Thank you for teaching from our pain, and in this book and in your life. We have a little bit more time left. You and I could talk all day.
I
Uh,
know.
I know you've got another event to jump to. So I love how you don't take a victim stance in your book or in your life, it seems. And yet you are full of what I would call sacred rage. So I want to hear you read again. You have a beautiful reading voice. This is from one of your Take a Pause sections, and this one's on page 89, and it begins with, if you're up most nights. This one really helped me. There was something
Yeah.
in it that has helped me a lot. So do you mind reading that for us?
No, not
To
at
us?
all. If you're up most nights still wondering, why me? Realize you may be at the precipice of your truth. You don't need to stop feeling sad, frustrated, or angry. Nurture those emotions, get curious, and keep asking, keep screaming. You may eventually scream your way into why not me? And then your truth. And it doesn't matter how long that takes. Slowly but surely, the screaming will metamorphose into sheer marvel. And when the ratio of marvel to anger tips enough, you will have walked into a different kind of bliss.
There's so much to learn from that. And I love get curious. On my screensaver, it says curious, playful, and kind.
Oh,
And
I love that.
curiosity, wonder, awe, these are things that we know as children, and that so often society kind of squeezes out of us. So thank you for that invitation to remember to get curious. You ask us to go deeper into our feelings while so many people resist the pain and divert or numb out. But instead, you're inviting us to do the opposite. This book is
Yeah.
going to help so many people get real about their pain and to let it be the true guide that it is. When
Yeah.
the memoir of mine came out, people would say, thank you so much for writing through your pain. And I had one thing I wrote back to everybody, and I said, I'm sorry you're going through this pain. I have learned that pain can be a tremendous guide when we breathe into the groundlessness of it.
Yes.
And you show us all these ways to do this without doing the bullet points that were, you're great about talking to us about ritual. And some of the rituals that have helped you. Was particularly interested in your ancestral circles. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering that this is on page like around 169. Can you share more about this concept and practice? No matter what your faith base is or what your ideas are, we all come from somebody, whether it's biological or a legacy of adoption, whatever it is. But talk to us about your definition of ancestral circles and how you practice this concept in the way of, healing trauma, finding joy, especially.
Yeah. Well, I look to my ancestral circles often for both guidance as well as connection, honestly. And I offer that to people as an invitation when we're feeling isolated, alone in our pain. We can feel like nobody understands. But when I tap deep into that inner knowing that ancestors have lived this pain, they have not only lived it, they are the reason I am here to live mine. They are the reason I'm still here and can do this what thing called life, right? And so sometimes I will call on the ancestral circles of mothers for in particular when I'm particularly feeling dark and doom like, which by the way happens even when you're joyful. That's what people need to understand, is that joy is about holding all of it, not erasing it. And so when I'm feeling completely dark and wondering why again, Do I feel this way? I will sometimes tap into all the mothers who have lived suffering for their children, who have worried for their children, lost them, maybe done things that they felt contributed to that, all of the above. And I will tap on them for their love, compassion, and guidance, and know that I'm being held in many ways, even if it is only in this moment felt in my DNA deep to my core, which I think is quite powerful. But maybe people don't feel like that's so abstract. But I promise you, if you try this practice, which I describe more in the book, you actually start to feel like you are connected to the world. And when we're connected to the world, our river of joy has more channels to flow.
I agree. You're preaching to the choir.
I know.
But the thing is, she doesn't preach. This is what I love, you know, and that kind of, again, we could keep talking forever, but in the interest of time, I also want to talk to you about your definition of gratitude, and you wrote it so well, and it's on page 155. I love your definition of gratitude and how practicing it helps, but I also love your spin on how it's been marketed in our culture, and I think watered down and manufactured. And you talk about how, you know, it's on mugs and t-shirts.
Yes.
And I was so grateful for that. You know, I think people underestimate the intelligence of people who are seeking in the wellness world.
I know.
So you really speak to that. Like, I don't mean to, I hate to say this, so I'm going to say it. This book does not kind of like dummy down to your pain. It asks you to meet it and go deeper into it, and to allow your pain to give itself to you. You know, I mean,
Oh, thank you
it's
for
just,
that.
yeah, I was so grateful, because I often run away from self-help books. In fact, I'm trying to get one published right now, and I don't want to call it a self-help book, but it is. And but it's kind of like the anti-self-help book. So when I opened this thing up, I was like, hello, sister. So so will you read the second paragraph of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
gratitude, because the first one I set up, but read the
yeah.
second paragraph.
Gratitude is not a wishy-washy platitude. It doesn't solve everything or mask reality. It is about looking at life instead of away, and finding the sliver of this moment that feels like something worth living and fighting for. Gratitude fundamentally shifts biochemistry and puts you in an awareness state to make change. It's on par in changing neurochemistry and immunology with tools like exercise or high intensity interval training. It's real science and magic all the same. And it may be one of the most powerful tools for healing through oppression and suffering that I know.
Oh, and if we had more time, I would ask you to talk to us all about the vagus nerve. In fact,
Oh, yeah.
cultivating joy. Do we have time for like a little 30-second snippet on it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, what happens in trauma and suffering is that we are felt unsafe. We feel on threat. Our vagus nerve is destimulated and our sympathetic nervous system is activated. When we do exercises that reactivate our vagus nerve, we're telling ourselves, you are safe, you are okay in this moment, even if the moments of your bigger life are not okay. And we have actually functional MRI studies to show that when we feel grateful, it signals the same areas in the brain as if someone we love is holding our hand through a painful procedure. And when I think about that, I think gratitude's a companion. So people will say, how can you be grateful when the world is such crap? And I say it's just an invitation. And also, I'm only grateful when I want to be and when I deserve that power back in my body. I don't do anything because I should do it.
I love that. You don't should all over yourself. That's not from your
Right.
book. That's not from your book, but I love that. Okay, finally, what do you hope is the ultimate takeaway for the reader? And I know there's so many, but like give us just like something we can hold on to. We don't need a bumper sticker, but when we put our heads on the pillow tonight, what's the takeaway from this book if we haven't read it yet? And even if we have.
Mm. Yeah, the takeaway is that all of you, deserve and choose joy, and that seeking joy will find your power. So it's not the reverse. We don't do all these things to find joy. We find joy to find power, connection, and belonging. And all of us deserve that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Tanmeet. You can learn more about Tanmeet and her book, Joy is My Justice, by going to thewomenseye.com. And there you'll also find the Women's Eyes books, 20 Women Changemakers and 20 Women Storytellers. Lee and I are both in that second one.
Nice.
And you can shop wherever you buy books and at changemakersbook.com. And of course, to see what else Tanmeet is up to, and she's doing a lot right now. This book is really getting around in the world as it needs to, as the world needs it to. Go over to her website, TanmeetSethi.com. That's TanmeetSethi.com. Thanks again, Tanmeet. And to all of you who are tuning into the Women's Eye podcast, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. I'm Laura Munson. And in the motto of the Women's Eye, remember, it's the world as we see it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for holding my work so graciously and tenderly.
Yeah, it is my deep pleasure.